I don't know who Ricky Nelson is, but that's
He
good.
sings the Garden Party song.
Okay. Oh, him. Welcome, comrades, to the art of cinema. I am Colonel T, your Minister of Propaganda.
And I am your glorious leader, General Secretary F, coming at you live from the studio, not phoning it in.
Sir, we're down to number 2 on our list of the top 10 films of the 2010s. It's The Ballad of Buster Scruggs by Joel and Ethan Coen.
Oh, I've seen that one.
Yeah?
I haven't seen any of the other movies that we've done, but I've
Right.
seen that one.
Excellent. Sir, this film is a collection of 6 vignettes about the Old West. In our first vignette, the titular Ballad of Buster Scruggs, Tim Blake Nelson is a singing cowboy. He narrates the story for us as well. He's a charming, affable dude when he talks to us, but everywhere he goes in the story, the people all hate him, and he ends up killing a bunch of them in gunfights. On a dime, Tim Blake Nelson goes from being affable and funny to being a cold-blooded killer, and back again.
Oh, sure, I can relate to that.
All the other characters are rough, unclean. They seem more like the kind of people you'd actually have found in the Old West. But Tim Blake Nelson, the singing cowboy, is dressed in white, in a costume, not real clothes. He comes across as a dude, a tin horn, a phony, so everyone hates him and picks gunfights with him. But Tim Blake Nelson has superhuman gunfighting skills, so no matter how outnumbered he is, he always easily comes out on top. Until the end of the story, that is. After Tim Blake Nelson shoots down his last victim, and just as he's about to sing us another cowboy song about it, another singing cowboy comes riding into town, dressed in a black costume to Tim Blake Nelson's white. It's Willie Watson, who's looking to make a name for himself by besting the notorious Tim Blake Nelson.
Now, Willie Watson, he sang, "Maybe I didn't love you."
Oh, that's Willie Nelson.
Oh, I thought he sang the Garden Party song. Oh, that's Ricky Nelson. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Willie Watson challenges Tim Blake Nelson to a showdown, and for as superhumanly fast as Tim Blake Nelson is with his 6-shooters, Willie Watson is that much faster again. He shoots Tim Blake Nelson dead before Tim Blake Nelson even knows what's happened. At the end, Tim Blake Nelson's soul departs from his body and starts slowly flying up to heaven. He and Willie Watson sing a duet, a sad cowboy song, as Willie Watson rides out of town. It's an extremely funny story, sir, but also brutally violent. It juxtaposes the fairy tale Old West with the harsh reality of the actual place.
I like movies that juxtapose.
Yes, sir. And that's in fact what all the vignettes in this film do. They juxtapose. They juxtapose the mythic, romantic, storybook Old West against the violent, thuggish quality of the actual time and place.
So the Old West is similar to the People's Republic of F as far as all this violence goes.
Yes, sir. The two are analogous.
Right, they're cognate, each one not unlike the other. Colonel, my policy has been to provide an affluent life for the workers, but mistakes were made in carrying it out. I freely admit it.
Sure.
I may have killed tens of millions of PRF workers in the process of emancipating them.
Yeah.
So here's a conclusion I've come to after my many years of service as your glorious leader. Among all the errors I may have committed, the greatest of all of them was that I believed that someone really knew something about socialism, or that someone actually knew how to build socialism.
Yes, sir. You didn't know how to do it, but as you've taught us in your manifesto, it is he who endures to the end who shall realize the utopia.
That's right, Colonel T. I see you've been reading your daily manifesto. That's how you got to this position in the first place. By patience and perseverance shall I make manifest the revolution. It's just a slow, steady, dialectical process of hammering out the contradictions in PRF society.
In Near Algodones, the second story, James Franco tries to rob a bank where Stephen Root works. You may remember Stephen Root from such other Coen Brothers roles as the radio station owner in Oh Brother Where Art Thou and the crime boss that Javier Bardem kills in his office in No Country for Old Men.
Oh, yeah, and he was also the guy who wanted his stapler back in Office Space.
Right.
He's a janitor in Election, I think.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Wasn't he the other guy in Swingers? The other guy besides Jon Favreau? Oh, no, that was Robert Duvall. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. Anyway, James Franco walks into the bank where Stephen Root works as the only teller. James Franco is taciturn, sir. He has very little to say, whereas Stephen Root talks endlessly, which annoys James Franco. James Franco looks to be the badass outlaw who should easily be able to overpower the humorous and ridiculous Stephen Root. But it turns out James Franco has underestimated Stephen Root, who's prepared for bank robberies and is able to subdue James Franco. Stephen Root covers himself with pots and pans that amount to a bulletproof suit, making him impervious to James Franco's gunfire. Stephen Root runs up to James Franco outside the bank and knocks him out with the butt of his rifle.
Oh, that's a shame. I was hoping to see James Franco make off with the bank's money. You see, Colonel, the transformation of banks from modest middlemen into a small, unduly powerful cadre of monopolists has been a primary cause of the degeneration of capitalism into capitalist imperialism.
When James Franco wakes up, he's sitting on a horse with a noose tied around his neck. He's about to be hanged by a posse of lawmen led by Ralph Ineson. Sir, you may remember Ralph Ineson as the father of the Puritan family in The Witch, which is ranked at number 5 on our list of the top 10 films of the 2010s.
Well, Ralph Ineson's really moving his way up the ladder at number 2 there.
But before Ralph Ineson and his posse can hang James Franco for bank robbery, they're ambushed and killed by a band of Comanche warriors. But when the Comanche chief sees James Franco with a noose around his neck tied to a tree, the chief leaves him there to die as his horse eventually walks out from under him. But before that happens, a cowboy driving a herd to market finds James Franco and frees him. The cowboy, like Stephen Root before him, will not stop talking to the taciturn James Franco. James Franco rides along with the cowboy on his cattle drive, but it turns out the cowboy has stolen the herd of cattle he's driving. Another posse of lawmen appears on the horizon, riding down the cattle rustler to arrest him. The cowboy turns tail and rides out, but James Franco, apparently not understanding what's going on, stays where he is and gets arrested by the posse. He's taken into town somewhere and sentenced to hang once again, this time for a crime he didn't commit. James Franco seems strangely unaffected by all of this. He's not anxious or afraid to be hanged as far as we can see. It's just another day in the life of a young outlaw in the Old West. Just before the hood's placed over him, he looks out into the crowd of onlookers and meets the gaze of a young woman. "There's a pretty girl," says James Franco, and then he's hanged.
You know, James Franco getting hanged for a crime he didn't commit, when who should really be hanged is these bankers. But I'll tell you what, though, in the interests of a proper organization of the national economy, a thorough eradication of bank speculation and a complete emancipation of the toiling masses from the exploitation by the banking capitalists, and in order to found a single unified state bank for the People's Republic of F, which shall serve the interests of the people and the poorest classes, the Central Executive Committee decrees that 1. Banking is hereby declared a state monopoly. 2. All existing private joint stock banks and other banking houses are to become part of the state bank. 3. Assets and liabilities of establishments in the process of liquidation will be assumed by the state bank. 4. The manner of amalgamation of private banks with the state bank will be determined by a special decree. 5. The temporary management of private banks is entrusted to the Council of the State Bank. And 6. The interests of small depositors will be fully protected.
In Meal Ticket, Liam Neeson is an aging Irish producer of public entertainment who's traveling the Old West alone presenting shows. There's still snow on the ground. Winter up in the mountains is just ending. I say that Liam Neeson is alone, and in fact he is, but he drives a wagon through the Rockies to different towns to present performances. In the back of the wagon, Liam Neeson is carrying Harry Melling, an English actor who does oratories from Shakespeare, Shelley, the Bible, and other classic literature. Harry Melling has no arms or legs, sir. He's one of a number of characters in the Coens films that are crippled or disfigured, whose conditions terrify the other characters.
Harry Melling's disability being an obvious allegory for the way capitalist imperialist societies are crippled by private property and the exploitation of the proletariat by the American bourgeoisie.
Correct as always, sir.
But that's a little on the nose, Coen brothers. It's a little obvious.
Liam Neeson manages to live off the money the crowd puts into the till after Harry Melling's performances. Liam Neeson and Harry Melling never speak to each other in the film. Each one needs the other to get by, however, so they're stuck with each other.
Just like how in a capitalist society, the proletariat needs the bourgeoisie so they can get ripped off in horrible jobs, and the bourgeoisie need the proletariat so that they can exploit the fruit of the workers' labor.
As we watch Harry Melling give more performances, we see that his oratory is the only way he can express his pain to people. No one cares for him, no one would hear from him personally, so all he's got is to express himself on stage through his oratory. As the story progresses, however, less and less people show up to Harry Melling's performances. The money's getting tight for Liam Neeson, to the point that he hesitates to give Harry Melling his food for the night. One night, after only 3 people show up to one of his shows, Liam Neeson notices a crowd across town. He walks over to investigate. Another promoter has a scam running, a show with a chicken that appears to be able to do math problems called out from the crowd.
Well, that ought to help him exploit more of the fruits of the workers' labor.
So Liam Neeson buys the chicken from this promoter to add it to the entertainment he offers to the Old West workers. The math problem-solving chicken is popular. It makes money for Liam Neeson, where he can't make money, can't support himself through fine art, through Harry Melling's oratory. The chicken is cheap, popular entertainment that will sell, and the chicken is much cheaper and easier for Liam Neeson to feed and care for than Harry Melling has been. So one day, as they're headed through a mountain pass, Liam Neeson stops at a railroad bridge over a mountain stream. He drops a large stone down into the water to see if it's deep enough. It is, so he walks back to the wagon. Harry Melling has been watching all this and knows his luck's run out. The last shot is of the back of the wagon as Liam Neeson drives it to the next town through the mountains and the snow. It's just the chicken in the back now. Harry Melling is gone. Fade to black.
So Liam Neeson, the bourgeois promoter, exploits the labor of Harry Melling, the proletariat, and then disposes of him as soon as he comes up with a cheaper way to pick the workers' pockets. At least if it had been me who'd dropped Harry Melling into that stream, I would have done it as part of the process of purging counter-revolutionaries from society, you know?
Sure.
My aim has always been to implement the revolution, Colonel, not just to kill people.
Right.
Even now, and you can take a good look at me. Am I a savage person?
No, sir.
My conscience is clear. There's what I did wrong and what I did right. Now, it's true. I've done some things against the people, but then again, so has the enemy. And let's not forget, Colonel T, that if it weren't for the shining example of our struggle, there would be no North Korea right now.
Yes, sir. Obviously, it's all been a net gain for the world's revolutionaries. Okay, time for vignette number 4. This is a lot of stories for me to explain, sir.
A lot of plot points for you to set up and pay off, Colonel T. That's why you're the Minister of Propaganda, for now.
Yes, sir. In All Gold Canyon, Tom Waits is an old gold prospector. He finds a beautiful valley up in the mountains and starts digging around, panning the soil to see how much gold is in it. He digs around in different spots, getting closer and closer to a vein of gold until he finally finds it. Tom Waits has struck pay dirt, as it were. But just as he struck his fortune, he sees the movement of a shadow. Someone is behind him. Someone has been stalking him, letting Tom Waits do all the work to find the gold, only to ambush him and take the gold for himself.
You know what that reminds me of?
Does it remind you of how the bourgeoisie robs the proletariat of the fruits of their own labor, enjoying all the benefits while leaving the workers destitute?
Oh, yes, it does. It reminds me of how the blood of the workers oils the gears of the capitalist machine.
Well, everything reminds you of that, sir.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm like a sausage casing machine. Put any different ingredients you want, but you know what comes out? Sausages. And when I say sausages, I mean the revolution.
Tom Waits hears the hammer being pulled back on a revolver. He's 6 feet underground, so the outlaw behind him, who looks like Billy the Kid, has him cornered. Tom Waits braces himself, not having a play. The outlaw shoots him in the back. The outlaw sits at the top of the dig. He rolls a cigarette and takes a draw, letting some time go by to make sure Tom Waits is dead. Then the outlaw jumps down into the dig to take the gold, but Tom Waits has been playing possum. Tom Waits overpowers the outlaw, takes his gun, and kills him. He walks down to the stream to clean his gunshot wound and finds the bullet didn't hit anything important. It went clean through him. So Tom Waits collects his fortune in gold, rests up a while to heal, and then heads back out of the valley to cash it in for his retirement.
You know, Tom Waits has that song, Postcard from a Hooker in Minneapolis. First she says she's gotten married and her husband plays the trombone, but then it turns out she isn't married.
Oh, no trombone-playing husband?
No. At the end of it, we learn that she's in jail, and she's only writing to Tom Waits because she needs money to pay a debt to her lawyer. But the good news is that she's going to be eligible for parole by Valentine's Day.
That's so romantic.
Yeah, and it makes me think about the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the revolution. If the hooker didn't live in capitalist, imperialist Minneapolis, America, and, well, you get the idea.
Yes, sir. The 5th story in the Ballad of Buster Scruggs is The Gal Who Got Rattled. It's about Zoe Kazan, a young woman living in Missouri who's about to head west on the Oregon Trail with her older brother. Her brother has business interests in Oregon, and in securing those interests, he's arranged for Zoe Kazan to marry his business partner.
Ah, an arranged marriage.
That's right. So Zoe Kazan and her brother head west in a large wagon train. But not long into the drive, her brother very suddenly dies of cholera. They bury him in an unmarked grave so that no one will rob the grave and desecrate the body.
Oh, that's just like in that game Oregon Trail. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, like we used to play that in elementary school. And when people would die, you could actually write like, dickhead or jerkface on their gravestone.
Right.
But then the teacher...
Teacher not pleased.
No.
Now, Zoe Kazan is alone on the Oregon Trail, with no one to go home to in Missouri and no prospects out west. And this is an earlier time in American history, sir. Earlier in the process of the degeneration and collapse of capitalist imperialist societies. So Zoe Kazan is uneducated. She doesn't know what money is worth. She has no place in and can't operate in a man's world.
Of course she doesn't. This is the United States, Colonel. The Americans have no concern for integrating their women into a collectivized labor front.
No, sir.
In the People's Republic of F, on the other hand, we understand, or I understand at least, that our women constitute a vast reserve of labor power that I can harness to fuel the revolution. PRF women are like oil fields, Colonel. Oil fields that we can drill down into and extract the valuable commodity that they are.
Our women are the black gold of the revolution. Yes, sir.
Speaking of which, have you managed to find any actual oil fields here in the People's Republic of F?
I haven't, sir, but you should speak to the Ministry of There Will Be Blood about that.
Yeah, we could really use some oil to sell overseas, I can tell you that. If only the PRF was in the Middle East. Of course, that would mean the Americans would bomb us even more than they already do.
Right.
But I digress, Colonel T. Where were we? Zoe Kazan's brother has died, so now she's alone in the wagon train out on the Oregon Trail.
Yes, sir. Zoe Kazan's brother had hired a young worker to assist them on the trail, but when they buried her brother, they unknowingly left his money with his body. So Zoe Kazan is broke, too. She's really in a fix then. Zoe Kazan starts talking to Bill Heck, one of the trail hands who's guiding the wagon train. She explains her predicament to him, asking Bill Heck what she should do about the money she owes her dead brother's hired hand. Bill Heck has some ideas about how she might be able to settle the debt. He negotiates with the hired hand on her behalf. But as Zoe Kazan and Bill Heck discuss how she's going to get out of the bind she's in, they start to fall for each other. This vignette turns out to be a beautiful love story. Zoe Kazan and Bill Heck court each other in a restrained, formal, and very old-fashioned way that will seem strange to the depraved, profligate American capitalist imperialists of today.
Right. Fraudulent.
Watching the couple get to know each other is really charming. They take their time, they're careful and patient, they think of each other before they think of themselves. It's an actual romance, moving to see next to the throwaway hookups in so-called love stories in so many movies today. And eventually, Bill Heck arrives at the solution to Zoe Kazan's predicament. Haltingly, and taking care to assure her that he's not making himself her only option, he proposes to her, and she accepts. Bill Heck and Zoe Kazan are going to marry and start a farmstead together in Oregon, sir. Isn't it wonderful?
Oh, sure. If you think that backwards, regressive religious dogma from whence the Americans have failed to emancipate their workers is wonderful.
Bill Heck tells Zoe Kazan that perhaps in marriage they'll find comfort together.
Fine. Maybe they will find comfort together once they're married, but they won't be able to abolish private property, which is the foundation of the oppressive American regime. I mean, what is a marriage but to make another person into your private property? This whole thing makes me sick. The fuck?
Later on, Zoe Kazan has ridden a ways off from the wagon train. She's out playing with her brother's dog, watching him bark at prairie dogs. Granger Hines, the other much older trail hand that Bill Heck is working with, comes and finds Zoe Kazan and tells her she shouldn't have wandered so far from the rest of the train. And just as she starts to ask him what the big deal is, a band of Indian warriors appears on the horizon. Granger Hines raises his hand to them in a sign of peace, but they don't respond, so he knows they're in for a fight. Granger Hines sets up for it, and before the fight gets started, he hands Zoe Kazan a revolver. He tells her that if the Indians get him, she should put a bullet through her head, because if the Indians catch her, they'll do things to her that mustn't be allowed. So the Indians attack, and with the first wave, Granger Hines is able to hold them off. But he knows the Indian warriors are going to attack them again and again, all day. We're going to have a good fight, he says. Then the second wave comes, and just as it looks like Granger Hines has fended them off again, an Indian warrior jumps out from behind a horse and strikes him in the head. Granger Hines falls to the ground, and the warrior kneels down to scalp him. But Granger Hines was playing possum, much like Tom Waits did in the previous vignette. Just as the warrior kneels over him, he raises his pistol and kills him. Granger Hines and Zoe Kazan live to fight another day, sir. Except not. Zoe Kazan had seen Granger Hines fall to the ground to play dead, but she couldn't see that it was a ruse. So when Granger Hines walks back over to her, he finds that she's killed herself like he told her to do. Granger Hines rides back to the wagon train. What exactly will he say to Bill Heck, whose fiancée has just shot herself on his instructions, and as it turns out, perhaps avoidably?
So Bill Heck doesn't get to own Zoe Kazan?
No.
He can't make her into his private property?
Mm-mm.
Because she's dead? Pfft, who cares? Bill Heck should be happy how the whole thing turned out. I know his regressive prejudices don't allow him to see it, but the fact is that circumstance has freed Bill Heck from the stifling, oppressive institution of marriage, and Zoe Kazan has been spared the more so from a life of dependence and subjugation to Bill Heck. Really, those Indian warriors did her a favor.
Yes, clearly that's the point of the story. You're a true romantic, sir.
That's true. That's what makes me the architect of the utopia, the gardener of human happiness.
In the sixth and final vignette, entitled The Mortal Remains, we find 5 passengers in a horse-drawn coach driving down a road at sundown. There's an Englishman and an Irishman, John Joe O'Neill and Brendan Gleeson, sitting in the backwards-facing seat, and 3 older passengers in the forward-facing seat across from them. One is a fur trapper, one a Christian matriarch, and one a French poker player who'd been active out in the Old West. Each of these 3 could conceivably be characters from the earlier vignettes later in their lives. For example, the French poker player here could be the same guy Tim Blake Nelson sat down to play cards with in the saloon before he killed Clancy Brown.
Oh yeah, Clancy Brown, the evil prison guard from the Shawshank Redemption.
Strangely, the 3 passengers seem unsure where they're going and how long it'll be before they get there. John Joe O'Neill tells them they're on their way to Fort Morgan, Colorado, and will be there soon. Each of the passengers, in turn, speaks about their lives and their view of the world.
Let me guess. They're just going to drone on and on about their capital and their empires and how they love their capital and want more empires.
Actually, no, sir. The old trapper had been living alone in the mountains for many years and would come down into town occasionally to sell his pelts. But the townsfolk found him off-putting and tedious, and he wasn't able to get along with them. He'd had a sort of common-law marriage to a Hunkpapa Sioux woman, and even though they didn't speak a common language, they'd been able to communicate non-verbally. Brendan Gleeson asks if the trapper loved her. "I don't know, I never even knew her name," he says, but the experience proved to him that people are all pretty much alike despite their superficial cultural differences. The Christian woman takes exception to this. She says people are not all alike, that there are 2 kinds, upright and sinning. Her husband is a preacher and authority on spiritual hygiene, as she puts it. He travels around lecturing on such matters. She chides the trapper and poker player for their lack of concern for spiritual betterment. She's been separated from her husband for 3 years, but she expects to see him when they all arrive at Fort Morgan. The Frenchman, however, questions whether the flame she and her husband shared will still be there after 3 years apart. The Frenchman believes that we can never really know other people. He tells the Christian woman that what love means to her and what it would mean to a charismatic public speaker like her husband might be 2 very different things. As the Frenchman questions the love between the old woman and her husband, it offends her and the trapper, and a shouting match starts up. The old woman gets choked up and hysterical, so the Frenchman calls for the coachman to stop. But the coachman won't stop, even in an emergency. The sun has now set. Brendan Gleeson takes his hat off and sings a sad song about a young man dying in his prime. This calms the passengers, and then the trapper asks what business John Joe O'Neill and Brendan Gleeson are in. John Joe O'Neill then explains what's going on in this story. He says that he and Brendan Gleeson are reapers, harvesters of souls. They help ferry people to the afterlife. This shocks the passengers, as you might imagine. John Joe O'Neill tells them that he likes looking into people's eyes as they try to make sense of it all as they pass to that other place. He looks menacing, devilish, as he tells them so. Then the carriage pulls up to the hotel at Fort Morgan. Everyone gets out to go inside. The interior of the hotel is dark, except for a bright light shining down from above, from the upper floors. The Frenchman is the last to enter the hotel. He watches the coachman lead the horses and carriage back out into the dark night, finally understanding where he is and what's going on. Then he turns to enter the hotel, resigned to whatever it is that awaits him inside. He puts on his top hat, takes a deep breath, and walks in, closing the double doors behind him.
So it would appear that capitalism extends even into the afterlife for the Americans. That's how deep the cancer runs, Colonel T. John Joe O'Neill and Brendan Gleeson have seized the means of production of ferrying souls to the afterlife. They're the bourgeoisie of the hereafter. One of the problems I face as I implement the revolution is how to compete with all the money and the power the capitalists amass from their exploitation of the workers. It's expensive to keep implementing the politics of atrocity. I've built up a huge foreign debt that's going to be very difficult to pay off, and I can't pay it off by exporting soybeans or potatoes. That's all there is for the workers to eat here anyway. So I'm going to fund the revolution any way I can. For example, I export tanks and missiles to our comrades overseas, and I'll do this openly or secretly, legally or by smuggling, I don't care how. Stealing from capitalism is not like stealing from our own pockets. Marx and Lenin have taught us that anything is ethical so long as it is in the interests of the proletarian class and the world revolution. You know, Colonel,
Yeah.
experience shows that today the West is eager to encourage even the slightest sign of independence amongst the people of the PRF.
Right.
I'll be taking advantage of that eagerness. I must make cleverness the PRF national trait. Workers and soldiers, stop showing a sullen, frowning face and clenched fist to the West. Start making the West feel compassion for us, and you'll see how fast Western boycotts change into magnanimity. Let's present the People's Republic of F as an island of atrocity in the sea of imperialism. Our millennia-old traditions of independence are now up against China's political centrism and America's ill-gotten wealth. We're a pawn between two superpowers.
Workers and Soldiers of the People's Republic of F, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, is number 2 on our list of the 10 best movies of the 2010s. This has been the art of cinema with our glorious leader, General Secretary F. Let us maintain vigilance against the ever-looming threat of an American invasion. You are required to report any non-participation or dissent amongst your comrades. Don't forget to tune into The Art of Cinema again next time to find out which film from the 2010s is ranked at number 1 in your next mandatory re-education session.